Thank you all for joining us for the 18th Annual Religion and Foreign Policy Workshop. I'm Irina Faskanis, Vice President of the National Program and Outreach here at CFR. The Council on Foreign Relations Religion and Foreign Policy Program is dedicated to being a resource for faith leaders and policymakers and offers a forum for congregational leaders, seminary heads, scholars of religion, and representatives of faith-based organizations to discuss global issues in an interfaith environment. The Religion and Foreign Policy Workshop is made possible in part through the generous support of the Ford Foundation. We're delighted to welcome you all with us tonight. We have in person representing 20 states, plus Washington, D.C., the United Kingdom, and Sri Lanka. We have an excellent lineup of panels covering issues including peace building and reconciliation, international religious freedom, and global hotspots, as well as discussion groups on a variety of topics. And just a few reminders for the workshop: please silence your mobile devices so we don't hear the pinging and interruptions during the discussion. During the Q&A portion, please stand and wait for a mic for a CFR team member and state your name and affiliation before asking your question. This is particularly important because we are live streaming these discussions, so we want people joining us via live stream to be able to hear your questions. And we will be posting the video and transcript after the fact at cfr.org. There is a prayer room on the second floor in the conservatory, which will be open for your use throughout the workshop, and CFR team members can direct you there. So now to the meat of the evening. Our opening panel this evening on sustaining bipartisan religious engagement in U.S. foreign policy will feature Sama Norquist, Melissa Rogers, Knox Thames, and Peter Mandeville. We will have dinner after their conversation, at which point you can indicate your dietary preferences to the servers. Reverend Mark Fowler, CEO of the Tannenbaum Center for Interfaith Understanding, will deliver our dinner blessing. So with that, I invite our distinguished panel to the stage. Please join me. Peter Mandeville will be moderating tonight's discussion. Dr. Mandeville has dual appointments at George Mason University and Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. He served as director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and as senior advisor for faith engagement at USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development. And with that, I will leave it to him to introduce our distinguished panel, and I yield the floor to you. So thank you, Peter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Irina, thank you so much for the introduction. Many of you are aware that over the last 2 decades, the United States government has tried to more systematically engage and work with faith actors and religious communities in its efforts to promote religious freedom around the world and in much of our diplomatic and development work. We thought that it would be interesting to begin this year's workshop with an exploration of where that work stands 2 decades on. And I can't think of a better group of panelists to join me in that discussion. Obviously, we are meeting, as we all know, at a time of enormous upheaval in Washington, D.C. Much of it has touched spaces relating to U.S. diplomacy, and particularly the development work and foreign assistance. And everyone on this stage has had some contact and been involved in that work and will be an invaluable guide to helping us make sense of what we're currently seeing. Their full biographies are available in your programs, but I will briefly introduce them, mainly in connection with the roles that they played in U.S. government related to religious freedom promotion and religious engagement. Sama Norquist served in the first Trump administration, like me, at the United States Agency for International Development as the agency's chief advisor for international religious freedom, working directly to support Administrator Mark Green in that work. We're also joined by Melissa Rogers, who served as the director of the White House Faith Office in both the Obama and Biden administrations. I know that many of you are here because of your interest in foreign policy and international issues, and because many of your organizations and institutions have been valuable partners in the work that the US government has done. But of course, many of you have very close organic connections to domestic religious communities around the country. And so I think it's going to be very helpful to hear from Melissa about the intersection between developments on the home front and the international side of religious freedom promotion and religious engagement. And finally, we have my good friend of many years standing, Knox Thames, who has served in senior positions, both the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, as well as the State Department as a special advisor for religious minorities in the Near East and South Central Asia. Between us, we have served across multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican, across multiple agencies, USAID, State Department, the White House, US Commission on International Religious Freedom, other public institutions involved in this work, such as the US Institute of Peace. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight. I'd like to begin by asking each of you to reflect on the work that you've done at the intersection of religion and US foreign policy, diplomacy, and development. Some of the kind of main takeaways that you'd want to share with our audience in terms of how that work has gone, what's worked well, what's been more challenging, and then, of course, as we're all observing the rapid pace of developments around US foreign policy in so many regards and on so many fronts right now, any initial reflections and thoughts you have there? Sama, could I maybe start with you?
Sure. Good evening. Thanks for the Council on Foreign Relations for having me. This is a really exciting opportunity to talk about some of the work that we've done during the first administration. But let me give you a quick background about myself and why I have been interested in this field. I am an immigrant. I come from a Palestinian origins. I came to this country at age of 16. I've been interested in international relations since college. I did my master's on the role of religion in formulating foreign policy. And then I came to DC and 9/11 happened. And as a Muslim American and as an Arab American who works who's part of the center-right Republican Party, that was a huge experience for me. But it was an opportunity for me to make allies and learn and teach and educate people. I realized that sometimes the American people just feel isolated or away, that the other world is away. And things changed in 9/11. And it became sort of a personal responsibility for me to represent my faith. And those hijackers did not represent my faith. And the journey kept going on. I worked at USAID during the Bush administration, 43, working on a very similar portfolio. It was the public diplomacy towards the Muslim world. That was the big portfolio. Fast forward, I got the opportunity to serve in the Trump administration. I got lots of criticism from, members of community, friends, about how could you? And my first response was, this is an incredible opportunity to serve the President of the United States, the American people, and this homeland. As a Palestinian, I've never held any citizenship until I became a US citizen. I was 18 when I became a citizen. I was never able to vote anywhere. I did not have any rights anywhere. So despite some of the challenges in when it comes to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, that never shaped my thinking and moving forward. So when the opportunity came, I jumped on it and decided that it was around the time that ISIS committed persecution in Iraq and Syria. And it was my fight again to bring a different picture for those people that hijacked my faith and in the name of the faith killed so many people that I grew up with, or people like the ones I grew up with. So that's how it started, and it just fell on my lap, and I was privileged. I never took it for granted. I never take being an American for granted, because it is a privilege for me as someone who comes from background that I couldn't be a citizen anywhere. So that's my journey.
Great. Thanks so much, Saman. And I think it's really, really moving to sort of hear about how your personal background and that direct experience of coming to this country and finding a sense of rights holding for the first time have directly informed and inspired your desire to serve our country. Melissa, can we turn to you now and invite sort of your own reflections on that journey?
Sure. Well, I want to echo the thanks to the Council on Foreign Relations and Irina and her terrific staff here for keeping this tradition going, for bringing us together year after year to have these conversations, which are so fruitful. And also thank my fellow panelists and everybody here. It's great to see so many old friends. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So I grew up a Baptist from, just a childhood, and Baptists are always taught in my community that we have to defend religious liberty for everyone in equal measure. And that's a theological precept, not just a legal or constitutional one. So I was brought up in that atmosphere and wanted to become a lawyer from a young age and did go to law school, but never thought I'd be able to combine my interest in law and religion in my work, my professional work. And but lo and behold, I did find the Baptist Joint Committee for Public Affairs, as it was called at the time, where I started working as a pro bono attorney there, and found that I could combine these two great loves of mine. The way I ended up in government service, which was a complete surprise to me, was that I started working with some folks as the election happened when President Obama was running for president. And one of the questions on the table was, President George W. Bush had established for the first time this White House Office of Faith-Based and what is called community initiatives at the time. And so the question was, what should the person who won the next presidential election do with that office? And so along with my friend and colleague, E.J. Dionne, we wrote a paper about what the next administration should do with this office. We ended up recommending that they keep it and that they do certain, build on certain successes the Bush administration had, make certain reforms. And so that brought me into conversation with then candidate Obama, and then brought me ultimately into the administration during his second 4 years to run that office. Much to my surprise, it was a great opportunity, as you said, one you couldn't turn away, but never was one that I expected to have. So that also then, I got to know then Vice President Biden and became, then he called me to come back into the White House when he was elected. So, and the job in the White House is severalfold. One is to lead the White House office, as it's called during the Obama and Biden years, the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, as well as the agency centers for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships. I know many of you have worked with this network, and of course, Peter led the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at USAID during the Biden-Harris administration. So that's one wonderful piece of work, and an incredible continuity across the two, I would say 3 administrations. And let me just pause there and say, to appreciate the fact that when President Obama came to the White House, I think we all knew that it would be exceptionally unusual for a president of a different political party to continue an office at the White House that was the signature initiative of his predecessor. But he decided this would be a really good way to keep continuity in the country, to build common ground. And so I think across all my time in government, what I found through that office is this long tradition that actually far predates, as most of you know, even the George W. Bush administration, going back into the 19th century, of government partnering with faith-based and community organizations to serve people in need, both in our own country and around the world, has been something that's been longstanding, bipartisan, and really productive. And of course, it took hold because government struggles sometimes to connect with people that are really suffering, some of the most vulnerable people. But many faith-based and community groups excel at that and excel at working with government. And so it's a rich area where people can come together when they have many different policy differences and yet work together to serve people in need. And so it's been a real sweet spot over the years. I'll just mention very quickly the two other areas that are really important that I also worked on, which is advising on policy issues of church, state, and religious freedom in the domestic sphere, but sometimes also in the foreign policy space, and dealing with combating or countering hate in all its forms, including hate that's based on faith or ethnicity. And unfortunately, we've seen those problems grow over the years. And so that's also a very important part of the work that the position that I held in both administrations focused on.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. And I really appreciate the point you made about the continuity between the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administrations, and seeing the value of keeping that faith office at the White House and preserving the value of those partnerships. Actually experienced a moment of that myself in the Biden-Harris administration. Some of you may be aware that the Biden-Harris administration released USAID's first ever strategic religious engagement policy. We're very proud of it because it wasn't just the first time USAID had released a policy on why we work with faith actors. It was actually the first time that any US federal agency had developed and released an official policy. What's less known is that the process to write that policy had actually begun under the Trump administration, when that office was led by one of my predecessors, Kirsten Evans. And the actual text of the policy, as released by the Biden administration, I would say that probably 80% of it was drafted under the leadership of the Trump administration, which I really think speaks to that sort of bipartisan consensus around the value of these faith partnerships. Knox, can I turn to you now and kind of invite your reflections on what you've seen and learned in this space over the years?
And again, I would just add my thanks to the council, Irina, and you, Peter, for this. And these are colleagues I've worked with in different capacities throughout my 20 years of government service. I've now, for the last 5 years, been out of government. But my story begins in small town Kentucky, not a very international part of the world, but always had an interest in it. And I give a lot of credit to my parents who were educators at the local university, just to bring people into our home from different countries and different cultures to kind of help us understand the broader world. And then a real formational part of my interest in this work of human rights and religious freedom was when I, after attending a small Baptist school in Kentucky, went down to Atlanta to do refugee resettlement as an AmeriCorps volunteer with World Relief. And for the first time, I had friends who had suffered unimaginable things because they were from the wrong religion, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong political party. And it really started sparking some reflections about, the ultimate questions about why do bad things happen to good people, but also what is my responsibility as, a Christian who tries to take my faith seriously, but also an American, someone who lives in this country that's been blessed with such influence and resources to try to meet the challenge of a suffering world. And that led me to law school up in DC, and then a whole pathway of engagements in different government agencies, Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, State Department Religious Freedom Office, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom as the policy director, and then, as Peter said, serving in a special envoy role during the Obama and Trump administrations, focusing on religious minorities in the Middle East and South Asia. And I have to say, as I've been thinking about this work, I was always incredibly proud of our government's role in advocating for our values internationally. I mean, we talk a lot about transatlantic values and these shared traditions with our Canadian neighbors and our European partners, but time and time again, if the United States didn't show up to talk about human rights and religious freedom, it just really didn't happen. And we were and are the indispensable actor on these values issues, as well as a host of other issues. And I was always just took incredible pride to be sitting behind the placard that said United States and be a small part of representing our proud traditions. And I think the challenge, and I think we'll get into this, is how do we continue this? I think we're at a moment where, just sort of globally speaking, the international human rights system that was created after World War II, that the United States led in, is under incredible pressure. Countries, because of the rise of challengers like China and Russia and others who talk about human rights, are really having to decide, how much do we value our values? And are we willing to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk? And if we say human rights matters, if we say religious freedom matters, then will our foreign policy truly reflect that? And that's part of the role of working in these human rights departments in different parts of the federal government, is to be the little angel on the shoulder asking these questions. But I think we're at a moment of inflection to think about as a country, and I think this is great where the religious leaders are in the room, because you can play such an important role in sparking this conversation with your congregations. What is the role of the United States? What is our responsibility? What is our opportunity in this very complicated, fractured world to be a voice for the voiceless? And I can make the case both for values and interests, but I'll turn it back over to you and get into that later.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Knox. I think you're really framing precisely the questions that are on all of our minds right now, that we're going to want to get into in some detail as we move into the full room discussion in a little while. Samah, let me come back to you. You and I both served at, and I think greatly value, the work that USAID has done around the world. This is obviously, as we all know, a moment of enormous uncertainty and precarity when it comes to the future of U.S. foreign assistance. And so I just wanted to invite you to reflect on what you've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, and your thoughts on how to think about the role of U.S. foreign assistance in the context of some of, for example, some of the questions and points that Knox has been raising about the U.S. role in the world.
Thanks, Peter. I think from my experience, one of the things that I was stunned by is the demonizing of the word religion in foreign policy. I mean, it's not a new thing, but it's when all sort of things come out. It comes the Establishment Clause. No, we can't talk this in this region. No, you can't talk religion. And in my mind, as you said, both Melissa and Knox, the continuation of the work, to me, protection of religious freedom is an American issue. It's neither a Republican issue nor a Democrat issue. It's an American issue. It's our first right. And maybe I'm saying that because it's the immigrant in me that loves this country and loves the laws and loves how this incredible experience that the founding father put together. But the difference for me is that at this point, I don't consider religious freedom just a human right. I think we're very much past that. To me, it's a national security imperative. So while we have Kirsten Evans is a very good friend of mine. I used to drive her crazy, but she's one of the really thoughtful, incredible, compassionate people. The engagement with faith-based organization is crucial, but it does not replace policy formulation. So I think looking at the world stage from both different parts of the world, whether you're talking about the Uyghurs or the Rohingya or the Christians in or the Catholic Church in Nicaragua and Cuba, or the Christian and Yazidis in everywhere. It's not just persecution. There's persecution, there's alienation, there's discrimination. So every part of the world, there is a challenge that communities of faith face. So is it just human rights? To me, yes, it is, but we pass that. Looking at all sort of state and non-state actors that commit atrocities and genocide and persecution and discrimination against people of faith. So I think, to me, when the first Trump administration came in, it was very strong that they elevated religious freedom to a priority in his foreign policy. And that was an incredible thing to see a president embark on that, right? But it's not just that. The impact of that was humongous around the world. It was the ministerials that we did. It was the U.S. Commission, U.S. Commission role, and everybody started working with USAID would work with the U.S. Commission. We would go to State Department, and they yell at me, and I yell at them. But there was more movement towards talking about this issue from a national security perspective, because it is time for it to become, on the long term, part of those discussions. USAID had a very unique position in the Trump administration, that for the first time, USAID was leading the work. It was not the little brother or sister under the State Department. It was the White House implementer. It started with Northern Iraq. We started developing different things. I, of course, had to learn all the bureaucratic secret codes, whether it's you need a key issue to park budgets because you need to develop it. If you don't have particular things where you need to park the money, you can't do that. Oh, by the way, if it's a policy, no ambassador on the ground would listen to it because it did not come in a cable. So even though that the President of the United States was talking about it in every way, including at the UN, no ambassador in the field was interested to implement that. So every time I had to travel somewhere, it was like an emergency. I would get a call from the DCM and the political office, as if I am coming to convert people, which is not what I was doing. I was trying to use my charm to implement my president's policies. But it was very frustrating. Every ambassador is the chief of mission or her chief of mission. USAID mission directors are under the authority of an ambassador. So if I or even the administrator calls their mission director and say, I want you to do programs with local communities on this issue, if the ambassador said no, it's a no. So it took a lot of learning curve for us to understand how you bring that issue and put it into the bloodstream of not just US policy, but also budget, engagement with faith base, diversifying your partnership, because USAID has a history of partnering with faith-based organizations. And we do a lot of work, great work all around the world. But how we shaped that and talked about it, that led to the executive order that President Trump signed. Look, what's happening now is heartbreaking. I don't believe that the president, looking at all the records I have on what we have achieved during his first term, then last week, the vice president gives a huge speech about the accomplishments of the Trump administration in the religious freedom sphere. This was in Washington at the Earth Summit. And he was talking about all the great achievement, and we're going to do it again. Everything he talks about was USAID programming, right? So it gives me, are they not well advised? Like, and when you look at the players from the inside, yes. I don't think there is an understanding of President Trump's legacy programs and the importance of those to continue, because not only that we can do it, but we already have the structure because we did it in the first term and we could have been ready to hit the ground running. So to me, it's a continuation, it's an engagement, it's the faith base. Faith is a big deal for the American people. And we shouldn't shy to talk about it when we talk overseas, because it's part of the problem and certainly part of the solution. And there's not a single community of faith that was not subject to persecution, discrimination, or alienation. And everybody went through it. So I don't believe that without the United States leadership on this issue, the way that the President Trump did in his first term, I think we don't have a good chance to continue what we started in his first term. So I really, really hope that he does not forget his legacy programs that USAID was able to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Samah. I really appreciate you kind of pointing to some of those disconnects that we're all sort of sensing right now and helping us to kind of understand what's going on there. And I also appreciate the point you raised about the challenge that I'm sure all of us on the stage have felt, the challenges that come up when you try to raise or work on issues of religion within the US government, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been trying to do this for decades now. But we still all know that
I
there's
love
so
those
much work
lawyers.
to be done.
Lawyers are great.
Yeah, no, and I hope we will get into some of the Establishment Clause related challenges that we continue to face. Melissa, turning to you, many of us will be aware that just in the last few days, President Trump did issue a new executive order reestablishing a White House faith office, and yet again, kind of coming back to this idea of the disconnects. We've also seen the administration appear to criticize the different faith groups in the United States in different ways. A lot of confusions and questions about issues relating to religious freedom going forward. And so I'd love to invite you to kind of enlighten us in terms of what you're thinking about and tracking with respect to that religious freedom space right now.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would agree that there's a bit of a disconnect, at least, and I'll sketch that out in several ways. First of all, as you said, an office has been established at the White House, and that's one thing. It has various aims, including working on partnerships, but at the same time, we see a disruption of this long-standing bipartisan practice of working with faith and community groups to provide federally funded social services. And this is happening through the freezing or pausing of funding. It's happening through the dismantling of USAID and potentially other agencies, and also the attacking of certain faith communities at the highest levels of government. And so, it's just stark, the disconnect here. And so that is, I think, incredibly dismaying for the reasons I described, for several reasons. One is what I described earlier. These partnerships care for vulnerable people, and vulnerable people will be hurt because of the disruption in these partnerships. Bottom line. This tradition that has been so much a part of our common ground is being eroded swiftly. And that's of great concern. turning an area, the last thing we need in this country is to turn an area that has been an area of consensus into an area of conflict. And that's, I fear what's happening here, in addition to the concerns about people in need. Also on the religious freedom side and the religion side, there are worries as well. There's a concern about the ending, for example, of a policy that had been in place by the Department of Homeland Security for more than 30 years that, radically curtailed DHS from taking in immigration enforcement actions within houses of worship, schools, and other facilities like that, due to a recognition that houses of worship are places that need to be protected as sanctuaries, and that people need to be able to gather to worship without fear. And to have the Trump administration summarily rescinded this policy that had been embraced by both Democratic and Republican administrations, and did so abruptly, as far as I can tell, with no good reason and without talking to any of the community about the values that this policy represented. And so the Trump administration has been sued for the rescission of that policy, first by Quakers, and this week by a whole bunch of other religious entities. Some of you in the room may have participated in that. So that's really important. And then I'll just say another thing that I think is just symbolic of a very deep concern that I have. And that was for the President of the United States to accuse his political opponents of being anti-religion and anti-God, which he did at the National Prayer Breakfast. At that time, he said that they oppose religion and oppose God. No U.S. president has any business making such statements. I can't recall any others who've come close to making that kind of statement. That is not only false, it is wildly inappropriate, it's chilling. It creates the impression that a president may come after you using his power because he has, made this slur against you. And let me just offer one practical example about another fear that I have as a result of that. When the Biden-Harris administration came into office, we were obviously in the middle of COVID. And we had to focus like a laser beam on trying to overcome this pandemic, both in the United States and around the world. And so, President Biden and Vice President Harris were very clear to me and to everybody else, you need to go out there and work with every single person, including in the United States, including those who didn't vote for us, those who deeply disagree with us on policy and on legal issues, and we have got to work together to overcome this pandemic. And so, the president went out, and the first lady and many others of us, to pop-up clinics at houses of worship and invited in everybody who disagreed with us 6 ways to Tuesday on everything else, and said, let's work together. We can all come together around overcoming COVID. And a president has to be able to do that, needs to be able to do that. Not just when it's a pandemic, but that's one time when it's especially important. So to, begin to drive wedges between people, to cast out, and falsely accuse one's political opponents of being anti-God and anti-religious, just makes that kind of cooperation exceedingly difficult. So there are some real serious problems that I'm deeply concerned about of that nature.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Bliss. Obviously, much that we're going to want to get into shortly, and we will. After I ask Knox one more question, we are going to pivot to a question and answer and full room discussion. So please do get ready with your questions. Knox, Samah alluded to an issue that you and I have together spent a lot of time thinking about and working on. That is how to best understand the relationship between the promotion of U.S. religious freedom, promotion of religious freedom around the world, and the U.S. partnering and working with religious actors in our diplomatic and development work. It sometimes has felt over the years that these are talked about as sort of opposing functions, or as if there's a hierarchy between them, or even sometimes as if there's sort of partisan flavors to them. And I wanted to invite you to kind of share your thoughts on the appropriate way to think about the relationship between those.
Well, ideally, they go hand in hand. We want to have environments where people are free to pursue truth as their conscience leads, environments that support freedom of religion or belief, because those are environments that are going to be more stable, more productive, less likely to export ills that could come and touch us in harmful ways. And we also need to partner with religious actors on issues like sanitation, education, the day-to-day activities that all of us go through our lives needing that kind of assistance, because religious actors have that community reach. And this is where the two complement each other, because an environment that has religious freedom is an environment where faith actors can be their best selves and be that conscience of the community, to speak truth to power, to help with the poor and the suffering. And when there isn't religious freedom, then religious actors, religious leaders will be hesitant to engage on issues of conflict resolution, because they'll be afraid the government is monitoring them, or their neighbors may attack them. So there's a lot of just practical evidence I think many of us have experienced over the years where the two make a lot of sense together, and they build off each other. And I think this is where the question of how does the U.S. government fit into this? And there's the political diplomatic work that I've been involved in. There's the humanitarian assistance work that Sama has been involved in. And again, they complement each other. The diplomatic push to use the influence and might of the United States to encourage governments to change oppressive laws, let people out of jail, register faith communities, so there isn't that persecution, while partnering with those religious actors in community to meet these huge challenges of the developing world. And this is the tragedy of what we've seen the last couple of weeks with the dismantling of USAID. And there's been a lot of focus on the humanitarian aid and the waiver question. And but I think what's gone unnoticed outside of probably this room is the impact that the freeze of grants has had on human rights organizations that are doing religious freedom work, a lot of which were relying on the money USAID program under Sama's tenureship during the Trump administration, and that's all been frozen. So programs in Cuba, in Pakistan, these frontline countries where persecution is real, is now frozen. And so, I'm hoping this administration will start to connect the dots. We've seen them talk about and highlight, like Sama mentioned, the good work the first administration did that produced religious freedom gains because of the funding. We've seen, even in the Project 2025 document on USAID, is that official or not? But it's instructive in that religious freedom was mentioned a dozen times. There were certainly those in the incoming administration who saw the value of this work, and then the political dynamics of the last 2 weeks have totally disrupted it. But there's still an opportunity to revive these programs, to lift the freeze, to get the money flowing. I'm told there's a listening session happening this week in Washington with different constituents about unlocking the funds. I think that's crucial that the Trump administration realize the investment they made in the first term, realize the impact they were having for good, and recognize that this pause, freeze is having a detrimental impact on the groups that they have talked about publicly wanting to assist.
Great. Thank you all. You've given us so much to work with. So let's get into it. We've got about 30 minutes to us available for a discussion, questions and answers. So I'm going to invite our audience to ask their questions. When you're recognized to speak, could I ask that you stand up and that you wait for one of the CFR staff to bring you a microphone before you start speaking. And please do go ahead and introduce yourself, giving us just your name and affiliation. I know many of you in the room, but two things working against me in this regard. There's lights in my eyes, and I left my glasses in my hotel room. So if I don't recognize by name those of you I know very well, please do forgive me. So who would like to get us started this evening? Unsurprisingly, a sea of hands go up, which is no, keep them up. Why don't we go to, I think, there, is that Humera?
Aza.
That's sorry. I thought I saw your hand. Oh, sorry. Another dear friend, Azza. And then I saw, and then we'll go here.
Thank you very much. My name is Azza Karam, and I currently serve as a senior consultant in an organization that's newly created called Lead Integrity. Very happy, and very grateful to every single person on the panel. And I want to take this opportunity to doff my cap to Samah, because I know that she's had a tremendously important role to play. So thank you for everything you've said, and thank you for mentioning the hijacking of Islamic faith by certain categories of people. I think it's something that causes a tremendous wound to every single Muslim, regardless of their political affiliation. So thank you for that. Two quick questions. To what extent is it, and actually it's all to all of your distinguished speakers here, but to what extent is it possible to argue that religion does need to be part of domestic and foreign policy, and then get upset when the discord politically within an administration causes obviously a discord within the perspective and the application of that, of aspects related to religion? It can't be that you adopt it and it becomes a mainstream part of your policy and then think it's all going to be for the good. Second comment/question. None of you have mentioned the fact that thanks to what has been happening with Gaza, the US government in general and the US image in general has pretty much gone down in the dumps. So I'm not quite sure how you reconcile that with America has a role to play in advocating for freedom of this or the human rights of that. You might want to just touch upon what does it do now? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azza. I'd like to invite any of our panelists who would like to respond to any of the points that Azza has raised.
Well, I can go ahead and address, I think, some of the points you raised, the second part of your question. So, you know, we all know, and you all know, that the discussion about religion and government is always a tricky one, a nuanced one, an important one. I don't think we can have, simply because of our religious liberty guarantees, we need to discuss the relationship of religion and government, because we have to ensure, for example, that government policies are consistent with the First Amendment's guarantees of no establishment and free exercise. And we have to make sure that all people in the United States, and I would say around the world too, no matter their faith and beliefs, can engage government, and that they're not held off because of their faith or beliefs, whatever they are. So I think we can't say that, you know, religion and government shouldn't be in conversation, but how we do that is very important. And I think we're going to always have debates, for example, about certain religious freedom issues. You know, people are going to see things different ways, and that's to be expected. What I think we need to avoid is slandering, you know, a one or another side of the political, you know, the political landscape as being, you know, anti-God and things of that nature. That just poisons the atmosphere. It's not true. It's not appropriate. It's stepping over a line that certainly the president and the highest leaders of our country, and all leaders, I would say, need to respect. And so, you know, it is not that this is a simple thing, but I don't think we can just simply say, well, because there's some topics that are difficult and we feel strongly about them and sometimes argue with each other vociferously, that means that, you know, we should not have, you know, this conversation about religion and government. I think we just have to make sure that we're all doing our best to conduct the conversation as respectfully as we can, and not denigrating people for their faith or beliefs.
Samah Knox.
I'll say two things. Your first question. So it's not either or, right? And both parties have there are challenges in it, and the advantages and promoters of religious freedom. One of the things that I am fascinated by, and I talked to my friends at the U.S. Commission about, I remember the reaction after 9/11. And from different parts, particularly on the right. You fast forward to the times of, at least where I can mention the Trump administration, that the caliber that came particularly from the right to defend the Uyghurs, to speak about religious freedom, not just for one or two particular faiths, but for everyone, was astonishing to me. For people that looked and had perception from after 9/11 to when we got to the Trump administration, and there was this whole coalition of groups, policymakers, US commissioners, ambassadors, faith-based organizations. It was incredible. It was truly the point where everybody cared about this issue, and it didn't matter what faith you came from. That's just my perspective. And it's very helpful because I can go and talk to someone who had a different perception about my faith after 9/11. And now we're allies and we're partners and we fight for the same issues. In terms of the Gaza, so I have to say something about this, and I'll share a really quick story with you. So I'm very pragmatic. I will speak up and I won't shy about issues that I believe in and that I can do something about, right? So at the beginning of the Trump administration, a lot of people became angry. Why is this becoming a priority? And we're cutting all the other programs. And there was a particular experience where I had someone from the bureau that I was at that looked at me and was very emotional and said, I don't understand. How could you sit here and advocate for this administration while they're cutting aid to the Palestinians? And I looked at her and I said, one, because I can do something about this, and I can't do something about that. And two, because I come from a region, if all the mosaic of that region, if we don't protect the three Abrahamic faiths and what's happening, there will be no Middle East. That does not serve the interest of the United States. So the perception about someone like me that, oh my God, you care about Republican issues or conservative issues more than you care, that's just not fair. No one knows what's going on inside me. I have two teenagers that have watched me doing the work that I do. And my younger daughter, who's 15 now, was in 4th and 5th grade. When she went to 5th grade, she watches me like a hawk. Her teacher asked them to do a presentation about some effective personality. And she went and bought, I don't know how many of you know who Mama Maggie is. Mama Maggie is the Mother Teresa of Egypt. She is an incredible woman. She has created this whole network of providing services to, they call them, it's in the garbage collector area of Old Cairo. And you literally go to that area. So I took the administrator of Margreen, of USAID, and we went to visit her And they had this whole festival for us, right? So my daughter saw the stories, and I was explaining to her, the little kids, what she did and how she washed the little kids' feet. And so my daughter was affected by all that. In her mind now, it doesn't matter if you are a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim or Christian, because my daughters go to both. They go to a church and they go to a mosque. They celebrate Christmas and we fast Ramadan. That's the kind of kids and mother that I am, but that's also the kind of American that I am, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Samah. And Knox, you wanted to add something briefly.
Just a quick, I mean, you're asking about, are we being hypocritical? And I think that was always a challenge when you were doing human rights diplomacy on behalf of a superpower. How do you close the gap between the stated values and the actions? And, again, I talked about the pride I had of representing American values on the global stage. And we do more than really all the other countries combined. I don't think that would be hyperbole to say that. But at the same time, there are these gaps. And I think as a community of values in this room, how do we challenge our elected leaders to close those gaps so that when we say human rights matter, when we say religious freedom matters, we actually see that executed in a way that's tangible in our foreign policy. And it's wickedly difficult when you're inside the bureaucracy. But like Sama said, and we've all experienced, you do the job because if you can get the small wins and just change the ship of state by 5%, in 30 years, yes, you can really have an impact in an unimaginable way because of the incredible influence that our country has. So, I mean, I think we should continue to be challenged by those comments and then think about how do we close the gap between our values and what we're doing.
Great. Thanks to all of you. So let's go here. And also I want to make sure to bring in some voices from the back of the room. So could I see hands from the back of the room if anyone who'd like to ask a question? Okay, good. Then we'll go to that gentleman afterwards. I think, is that Reverend Adam Taylor? Yes, my eyes do still work. Wonderful. Right, please.
Good evening. Hey Pinim with Faith and Community Empowerment. Hi, Melissa. So first, Salma, thank you so much for sharing about the Trump administration's accomplishments. This is the first time hearing it. And so it does give me pause that many times we are in silos and we get fed a certain portion. So it was encouraging to hear of that, of those accomplishments. I'm curious, my first question is, now that President Trump has approved or given executive order for the faith-based offices, I am just wondering, what do you foresee of those offices doing in this new second administration? And what was your experience like? It seems like you've had positive outcomes in working with President Trump.
I yell at a lot of people.
So that's my first question. And then the second piece of the question is that he is standing on this platform of faith or evangelical Christians, et cetera, but attacking houses of worship, it seems counter to that. Right now, maybe they might be attacking certain houses of worship potentially, but in essence, at the end of the day, it opens the door for all houses of worship to be vulnerable. And I'm just wondering, in the first Trump administration, I saw a lot of insiders turn against him. And so I'm just curious if there might be some pathway where that might happen, or how can we all work together, bring some of those other individuals to advocate together in terms of some of these policies that are really hurting the country. As a immigrant, I remember very clearly until very recently always thinking, boy, I'm so glad I'm in the United States because my home country, they're doing these terrible things. But now the very things that I thought I was safe from is literally happening in the United States. So I mourn that loss, and I pray that there is still hope. And as a believer, that I remind myself that God is in control. But still, I like to hear your thoughts.
Great, thank you. Over to the panel.
Let me tackle your first question. So the president in his second term signed a number of executive orders to realign a lot of, particularly when it came to USAID. That is absolutely needed, in my opinion. There is a lot of waste. The government of the United States is not, pure. There's a lot of things that we can get rid of. There are some people that do, and I believe in both administrations, obstruct policies, right, for no reason. And I want to go back to the lawyers because that's, so there has been a lot of, everybody, USAID is evil, okay? So one of the things that people, because USAID sucked at telling the story domestically, because they always looked at, we do good overseas, right? When everything is happening, I don't think even the president understood the correlation between USAID and the domestic American faith-based organizations, farmers, our food programs, all the commodities are grown, are American-grown commodities. There are tons of wheat are now sitting in Houston, rotten, because of that freeze. And I sincerely don't believe that he knows all these little things, right? Because when you look not just on religious freedom, when you look at even Ivanka Trump during the first Trump administration, she partnered with USAID on what we call the WGDP. It was a $50 million initiative on helping women in Africa, particularly all around. So there are a lot of good things that we have done. It was a Trump legacy programs that either have been canceled or put on pause. And I don't know if you saw that. Even Reverend Graham came out a couple of days ago because Samaritan's Purse is one of our biggest partners. Not just in Christian places, but they were partners with us to help the Yazidis in northern Iraq. So I think there is real lack of understanding. Everybody thinks that USAID is just, this big, they just spend money on, yes, they are, but they had this scalpel, and instead of removing the tumor, they killed the patient. Without knowing, I mean, you look at their website, it's completely dark. Why is that, right? Everyone is claiming there's this program, and I don't doubt that there are bad programs that they need to go. But there are also a lot of good programs. And one thing I need to say, when USAID, there's not a single penny that goes out of USAID without first State Department approving it, OMB approving it. Then after those two, it goes to Congress, because we do something, they call it CMs.
Congressional
notification.
Thank you. So every time I needed to get a program out of the door, I had to go through all these three. Then I get to Congress, and then I get a call from our legislative affairs. Hey, so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, member of Congress so-and-so, want you to come to explain to them and justify what. So not like USAID has a blank check. There are regulations, there are monitoring. I'm sure there's some ways, I'm sure there are things that need to go and we shouldn't have. But it doesn't mean that you kill the entire thing, because USAID can be an incredibly important tool for Americans' national interest overseas.
Thanks so much, Sama. And you're pointing, I think, to another one of these really important disconnects that we have to talk about. Not just the oversight that the State Department has and the White House over the programs that USAID are running, but USAID among federal agencies has an unusually high percentage of its budget that's directly earmarked by Congress, meaning that the programs USAID are running is not necessarily the programs that USAID development professionals want to run. They're running the programs that members of Congress have directed them to run in specific sectors and specific countries. Would either Melissa or Knox like to respond? Then I guess we will go to Reverend Taylor, please.
Yeah, thank you. Reverend Adam Taylor, lead an organization called Sojourners. Grateful to see so many friends and hopefully make new friends. Thanks for what's been shared so far. So I'm grateful that many of you have named the freeze and dismantling of USAID. But I feel like one of the elephants in the room is Elon Musk that we have not mentioned by name. And it was Elon Musk, who is largely unaccountable, unelected, who obviously leads the Department of Government Efficiency, that is doing a lot of this wrecking ball work, not just the USAID, but now with other agencies. And it was him who literally said that USAID is evil, that they're a criminal organization. And we're among religious leaders, so I want to inject some scripture into this room. I'm going to quote Isaiah 5:20 that says, "Woe to you who call evil good and good evil." And so part of what makes me so distraught in this moment is the degree to which it feels like bipartisan support for poverty-focused foreign assistance evaporated in Congress. And many of us in this room spent a lot of time building that support for PEPFAR, but then for poverty-focused development assistance more broadly. And it feels like there's been a deafening silence, particularly on the Republican side. There are some exceptions to this. But I think part of what we desperately need as intervention is for Congress to stand up, both because what is happening, I would argue, is illegal, and the courts will ultimately decide that. It's deeply immoral, and it's deeply damaging to the US reputation in the world, let alone costing lives. So I would just love your thoughts about kind of where Congress is in this whole equation. What would it take to try to rebuild that bipartisan support? Because the name of this panel, I think, is a little misleading in the moment we're in now. If there's not much to sustain, we actually have to rebuild. So I'm curious how we rebuild.
Great. Thanks so much, Reverend Taylor. The panel title was planned prior to the inauguration, the events afterwards. But you're pointing to something that is absolutely accurate. Let me turn to my fellow panelists to invite their responses and thoughts on the questions you're raising.
I'll take I think I'll reiterate a point that is the lack of information by the American people. My former colleagues always talk about feeding the babies in Haiti, providing health programs somewhere in Africa. And I go, that's incredible and it's important and helping the vulnerable. And that's the good face and beautiful face of the United States and American people, generosity towards the world. But people in mid-Arkansas and Oklahoma don't really care. Because why are you taking my money over there while there are so many things are here? So the way we talk about it, there is nobody put the connection between American farmers. And by the way, there are a lot of American universities, science researches, health programs, all that kind of stuff that we do. And not just that. There are a lot of the private-public partnerships on so many programs that you help create different opportunities over there. Because some people can't come over here and go to our universities and stay or work. So you want them to build their own society because that serves us eventually. None of that talks. Everybody is just talking about Elon Musk. It's not about Elon Musk. I'm sorry. It's about what is good for the United States. And it's not even about the president. It's about the mission of a tool that we have that serves not just the American people, but does good around the world, which is what incredible faith-based organizations do. There's a lot of talks about big contractors and, slashing everything, all that. That's why I mentioned the darkening of the USAID website, because nobody can go and look at the programs that, if you have problems with what the Biden administration did, and many do, then go back and see what the mission throughout other administrations. You're eliminating an entire agency that can do a lot of work and good work. You can shrink it. You can modify it to realign with your policies, but not take it down. But the American people only know USAID that you take our money and you give it to foreigners. So that's where I stand.
Thanks.
And Along those lines, I would recommend, I'm not sure if you saw it, a really excellent op-ed by Senator Chris Coons, who talked about, how USAID certainly helps people all around the world and USAID's work helps protect American interests. So I highly recommend that column. And speaking of IMOs, that'll help me segue to the next part of your question, Adam, or your point, which I agree that we've got to do intensive work on finding common ground among people of different political persuasions and ideological persuasions. And Senator Chris Coons has been so good about doing that. Hope springs eternal. That some of the things that have happened over the last few weeks will shake things up to a degree that we begin to have some new conversations across different lines of politics and ideology. And I've seen that happen. I've seen some people very courageously speak out in the last few weeks about their concerns of some of these actions, who are, conservative-leaning, Republican, whatever you want to call it. And so, again, hope springs eternal that by listening to one another, by forming new coalitions, by trying wherever we possibly can to speak in a shared voice across differences in our politics and our ideology, that some people may be able to hear us for the very first time. And so, that's certainly my prayer and hope that and I know you do this work yourself so well, Adam, and really appreciate it. We've got to just double down on that and try to learn to listen and work together in ways perhaps that we haven't even before.
Just a quick addition. Peter and I, through our affiliation with U.S. Institute of Peace a few years ago, put together a working group of folks, right, left, and center, all faiths and none, to think about how do we protect international religious freedom as a bipartisan foreign policy initiative. And the first recommendation was really obvious, but we thought it needed to be said, is don't politicize the work of protecting international religious freedom, because it's often about life and death. It's some of the most heinous situations in the world. So I think in this debate about funding, we also need to have a mind towards the end goal and the end communities we're trying to assist, that they don't become part of the political football.
Mm-hmm.
And that's super hard to do in this social media environment we live in. But while we're working to make the case for why USAID is needed, and why the funding needs to be turned back on, that the groups we're trying to assist we try to put a hedge of protection around them, to use some church language, so that they don't get sucked into these mind-numbing debates in DC, and that the United States can still provide assistance, hopefully once we sort this out.
Thanks, Knox. Folks, I'm afraid we have reached our allotted time. I regret there are so many questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. The good news is that we have the rest of the evening together, and of course we have all of tomorrow together. I want to invite you to join me in thanking our panelists for laying the groundwork for those discussions. Two things before we transition to dinner. One logistical reminder. I want to remind all of you that breakfast will begin here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And please be sure to bring your name tags and lanyards with you for that. Finally, before we turn to enjoy the dinner, I would like to invite to the podium Reverend Mark Fowler, who will offer a blessing before we eat. Reverend Fowler.
For you. And let us first take a deep breath together. This is the Religion and Foreign Policy Workshop. So let us ground ourselves in the one part so that we might participate in the other. We honor the First Peoples and the First Nations. With no name for God, they honored and revered Creator and creation, and were inextricably connected to it. We acknowledged the unceded lands upon which we gather, and with humility asked that we be responsible and accountable for any ongoing actions which contribute to the inequity of the First Peoples and nations. We learned to look to the East and the South and the West and the North. We look above and below and within and connect with the sacred. We acknowledge the traditions which sprang forth from the realization that there was something greater expressing itself across this planet and through the universe. We are grateful for this time together. We acknowledge that policy is foreign if we are foreign to one another. We strive in this time together to find our way back to each other and to bring our people with us. We pray that our hearts be broken open so loving kindness flows like a river, and that our voices are freed to speak love and truth and power for all the peoples of the world. We acknowledge all the ancestors represented in this room at this time. We thank them for the lives they lived, which give us our lives, and pray that we live lives worth acknowledging after we're gone. We bless the food we are about to receive, that it may nourish our bodies and our spirits, and we commit ourselves that no one shall go hungry, and that the bounty provided to us be shared according to need. We bless the people who set this room, will serve the food, will clean this room, and reset this room, and serve food tomorrow, and clean this room tomorrow. And may they and their people be blessed as well. This is my prayer. And if it's appropriate, please say with me, Amen, Amin, Ashe, and so it is.